Have been and will continue to travel through a number of aspects of what it means that we are carrying the gospel into the world, and how we practically then actually do that in ways that are effective. And there'll be different weeks where we're dealing with different components of that. But this week, today, before we start really entering into the bulk of sort of this process of sharing the gospel with people, we wanted to take some time and really explore this idea that we have great freedom when we are sharing the gospel. That actually the call and the privilege and the compulsion, the perhaps even one might say obligation as followers of Jesus to go and share the gospel, doesn't come with a burden as much as it comes with an extraordinary freedom. And if we do not understand the freedom that we have in this endeavor of sharing the gospel, then what will inevitably happen is that either we will share the gospel sort of incorrectly, perhaps not in its accuracy, but in terms of the way people experience it coming out of us, because we will feel this sort of need to try to convince people, this need to try to make something happen that's not ours to make happen. Or at a minimum, we will do the work well, but our internal experience of sharing the gospel will feel like an ongoing burden, anxiety, reality that we will live with. And it is not God's desire or intent that carrying the gospel into the world would feel to us like a burden we have to carry. When we have a misunderstanding of what it means to carry the gospel into the world in terms of what is our responsibility versus what is God's responsibility, what we inevitably end up doing is we take on to ourselves things that are not ours to take on, responsibilities that are not ours to take on. And if we do that, we actually position ourselves into a God-like scenario, right? That these things that are God's to do, I feel responsible to make sure they get done, and then I'm actually making myself God-like. I'm saying I am like a God. And when we do that, anytime a human being takes on the responsibility of things that are God's and God's alone, and we make ourselves more like gods than humans, the same thing happens every single time. We get crushed under that weight because we were not made to be gods. God did not create us to have the ability to have God-like realities. We are humans, and we are dependent on one God and one God alone, the only God. And when we try to behave like gods, we get crushed. You do not want to get crushed. I do not want to get crushed. So if we're going to walk into carrying the gospel into the world, we do need to have a clear clarity on what the scripture says is our freedom and what the scripture says is our responsibility, so that we're clear on what's our part and clear on what's God's part. Now, one of the things that has been really helpful to me over the years in terms of keeping my head on straight when I walk into any one of my days, as far as what my part is in this grand story of redemption and what God's part is in this grand story of redemption, is a story that God used in my life to give me a profound clarity about his part versus my part and what that means. And this story, some of you will know this story. If you've been around Mosaic or me long enough, you will have heard this story, and you might say, oh, I already know this one. Well, I remind myself of this story every week. So if this is somewhat repetitive to you, I promise you it's not repetitive enough, because this is the kind of thing we need to be reminded constantly. The story that God used is also not just about sharing the gospel. It's about life in general. But it certainly is going to be applicable to the reality of God. I want to go share the gospel. What's my part in this and what's your part in this? So when my kiddos were growing up, they're now all young adults, but when they were little, on Saturday mornings at my house, I would have the privilege of making waffles on Saturday morning. It was sort of a tradition we did every Saturday, as much as we could. And when I made waffles, the waffles that I made, we made from scratch. I ground the wheat from the grain in our pantry, got the eggs from the chickens, mixed those with the other ingredients. I didn't grab a box with pancake mix ready, and this was a make from scratch thing. And then what we would do is the waffles, once the mix was made, we would add chocolate chips to these waffles, and we would usually have 3 different chocolate chips to pick from, But those came from 7 options in the pantry. We had 7 or 8 chocolate chip options, but on any given Saturday, we would only use 3 of those. Now, the reason that's important is because the kids that helped in the kitchen on a Saturday morning also had say in which 3 chocolate chips we would pick for that morning. So here's what I recognize. So on Friday night, before the Saturday morning come, inevitably, several of my kiddos, when they were little, would come and say, "Dad, can I help with the waffles tomorrow morning?" And I knew when they asked, especially the littles, the 5-year-olds, the 7-year-olds, that their motives were mixed, right? Their hearts were not pure. They didn't come to me with a pure heart of exclusively desiring to unburden me from some of the difficulty of making waffles and to join me in the kitchen to come alongside and help me so that they could feel that I had an easier Saturday morning. That was not their pure motive. Some of them, certainly, part of what they wanted to do was to be helpful. And part of what they wanted to do was to experience the joy of being part of things. And part of what they wanted to do was pick the chocolate chips, right? And so I would notice that when my kiddos asked, that I would recognize that they had mixed motives. And because I knew they had mixed motives coming into it, what I would tell them is, listen, until you can come and ask me to help in my kitchen without the motive of wanting to pick chocolate chips, I am not going to have you help in my kitchen. If you're going to help in my kitchen, you need to have pure motives when you come in here. I don't want this mixed motive thing going on because that's of no good to you and of no good to me. You think that's what I told them as a dad? Little 5-year-old? You don't have pure motives. You can't help me in my kitchen. No, of course not. Of course, I didn't even mention that. I knew that. They knew that. But it was just as much a joy for me to say, of course you can help. The idea that they had mixed motives had no bearing on my decision to have them help or not help. And I recognized that. And it's just important to note that we come into every endeavor on planet Earth with mixed motives. And our dad knows that. He is not a fool. He understands we do not come with the purest of motives only for this. And do you know what? That has no bearing on whether he includes us in the story of redemption or not. He includes us anyway. So my kids would ask, I would know that there would be mixed motives, and then I would say the night before as they come, especially the littles, the 5s and the 7s, I would get on my knees and as gently as I could, I would look them in the eye and say, is there any part of your thought process that thinks as a 5-year-old you're going to be helpful to me in the kitchen? Is there any part that you think, Dad, can I help, is even an appropriate sentence? Because the word help does not apply here. I do not need you. I do not frankly think that you being in my kitchen is not only not going to be helpful, it is going to be a detriment to my efficiency in the kitchen. So, no, you are not going to get to help in my kitchen. Of course I didn't do that, right? Because I was also not a fool. I recognized that when a 5-year-old asks you to help in the kitchen, that is not necessarily to the adult in the kitchen going to be a helpful endeavor, but they want to be in the kitchen with you, and you want them to be in the kitchen with you for both the relational experience of partnership as well as you want them to participate in something that's bigger than themselves so that they can have the experience of saying, I did something special. Now, Saturday morning would come around, and sometimes on a Saturday morning, I would come down early to start getting ready to make the waffles, and I would go upstairs and I would call to the kids, it's the ones that asked, time to make the waffles. And sometimes they would say, I don't want to get up, I'm too tired, I don't want to do it. And I'd try 1 or 2 more times, and if they didn't, I'd go downstairs and I would be in the kitchen by myself. None of the kids that promised they would come and help actually came and helped. And what is my time in the kitchen like if none of them show up? Well, actually, to be honest, it is the most efficient experience I ever had on a Saturday morning when none of them showed up. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it was my favorite experience because I enjoy having them to some extent, but it was my most efficient experience. So if God's plan for redemption was about efficiency exclusively, then he would certainly not have any of us join him in the story. But efficiency wasn't my primary point in the kitchen. It was only part of it, and I would work without them. If the kids did not show up in the kitchen, did I get the waffles on the table for breakfast? I mean, the answer is very obvious, right? Yes, it's the biggest yes of any of the scenarios I'm going to paint because it's just me in the kitchen and everything I planned goes as planned because no child disrupts the plan, right? And so I'm obviously going to get the waffles on the kitchen. So actually, when we have the idea that if I don't join God in this kitchen of sharing the gospel, then somebody's destiny is not going to be what it should be because I didn't do what I was supposed to do, kind of seems like a really silly idea, doesn't it? When we know that the adult in the kitchen is more efficient without us than he is with us. So the likelihood of redemption being realized and everyone that needs to know Jesus coming to know him without our intervention is far higher than when we intervene. Are you with me so far? So the ideology that says you better share the gospel, otherwise somebody's not going to fill in the blank, that doesn't actually function with God as the adult in the kitchen. I grew up watching some of those videos where, you know, there'd be a scene with some young adults or teenagers in a car and they're driving and then there's an accident and they all die and then they're lined up, you know, 3 of them heading into hell and 2 of them heading into heaven, and then the ones in the line to hell would say, "Why didn't you tell me?" And then the kids in the other line would be like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize." And then slowly blood would form on their hands in the video out of that verse, "Their blood is on your hands," and then the youth pastor would say, "You better go tell your friends about Jesus." And we'd all be like, "Okay, I'm so sorry. I don't want them to die in a car accident." It was very motivating, for sure. But it is theologically actually not a helpful space to be, because we need to start with realizing that though God is gracious enough to include us in this grand endeavor of carrying his kingdom into the world, he does not need us to do what he's going to do. Is God going to complete every good work he started in every human? Yes. 100% that is a truth. And you're not in that sentence, nor am I. And is God going to make all things new? Yes. Finish redemption. Complete history. He is. You're not in that sentence either, nor am I. So we serve a God that already said he's going to do that. So our first freedom is that he does not need us, he wants us. And so if my kids didn't show up, I'd get it done. If you or I choose not to show up, we'll get it done. Now, when the kids came downstairs for breakfast and they hadn't shown up, when they got around the table, what I would do is I would say to all the other children, I had 8 of them, in case you don't know that, I would say to the 8 kids, "Hey guys, just so you know, before we eat, these 2 kiddos last night said that they would help me in the kitchen. They didn't come down to help me in the kitchen. So, 1, they're not getting waffles. And 2, let's all boo them for a second. Boo." Did I do that? No, of course not. Did they enjoy the waffles? They sure did. And did I say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe they didn't help"? No, I just said, "You guys are welcome to the table, enjoy the waffles." What I did not do, though, if they didn't show up, is I did not say, "Hey everybody, big round of applause for these 2 because they helped make the waffles." That's the only piece that was missing, that they were not included in the joy of the fact that the waffles were on the table. But I did not shame them for not joining me because I didn't need them in the first place. I just wanted them to enjoy redemption. Enjoy redemption. We're all going to enjoy redemption regardless of how this plays out. Now, if they did come in the morning into my kitchen and it was not a great day for them, right? I got 2 or 3 of them in the kitchen and they were bickering constantly. They were in comparison games. They wanted each other's jobs. They were fighting in between. They were shoving each other. They didn't listen to my instructions. They disobeyed what I said. They mixed the wrong ingredients together. One of them was carrying the bowl and its finished product just about ready to go in the waffle iron, and they dropped the bowl and it smashes, and all this work we've done is gone. And it went really badly in the kitchen. Did the waffles end up on the table? See, a tricky question, isn't it? Because now you guys are like, maybe not. I'm like, nope, they sure did, because there were 6 other kids waiting to come down and enjoy the waffles. And whose responsibility was it to make sure the waffles end up on the table? Mine. So knowing that 3 of my kids would join me, how many extra ingredients did I have? A lot. I had a plan B, C, D, E, and F. There was no version in which their disobedience, their struggle, their fighting, their bickering would thwart my plan to have those waffles on the table. Those waffles were ending up on that table without them or with them not doing well. You with me? Now, in the kitchen, if they were bickering and fighting and dropping stuff, did I, in regularity on a day like that, get down with them and what we might call discipline them, right? Say, hey, come on, I need you to focus. Hey, stop bickering with your sister. This is not okay. Hey, I know you dropped the bowl. That wasn't discipline as much as sort of a form of encouragement. It's okay. It happens to all of us. We're going to make a new bowl, but next time you carry it, just make sure you pay more attention to holding it, right? Did I do that in the kitchen constantly? Yes, because that's what a good dad does, right? Does God engage with us in disciplining us along the way and redirecting us and kind of saying, no, stop doing that. Yes. But when that day was over, the morning, and we sat at the table, and everyone was around the table, and these 2 or 3 were in the kitchen, did I say, hey, y'all, just so you know, they did make it into the kitchen, but they were terrible. They were terrible. And you are lucky you have waffles, because these folks made it. No, of course not. You know what I say every time? I say, hey, everybody, big round of applause for these 3, because they helped make the waffles this morning. And then they'd be like, and sometimes they'd know how bad it was, and they'd be like, thank goodness. But here's what I realize about that, right? That when we show up in God's kitchen and we kind of fumble our way through, we don't preach the gospel really accurately, the person doesn't seem to respond well, it doesn't really go well, we're bickering with each other, we're comparing all that. We joined God in this endeavor, and he knows who we are. We're little 3- and 5-year-olds in the kitchen joining him. And so what he's going to do is good and faithful servant remains in play. Good and faithful servant is not the consequence of how fantastic you are at doing God's job. You know what I'm saying? How you've proven your faithfulness to God. Look how good I am compared to the other humans that aren't that great. You are very good and faithful servant. You show up in my kitchen, you're getting at that table, I'm giving you applause. Now, if they showed up in my kitchen and they had a great day, they obeyed, they did their thing, they listened to my instructions, did the waffles end up on the table? Of course. And did I say, everybody, big round of applause for these 3? Yes. And here's the question. Did they make the waffles? Big round of applause for these 3. They helped make the waffles. Did they make the waffles? I have an answer for that. No, yes. No, yes, they did. Because we all know that without them, I would have still made the waffles. So in some way, we would say, well, they weren't necessary. But did they mix stuff? Did they watch the green light? Did they pull the waffle off? Did they do these things? That they actually did. So can we authentically, genuinely say, because they helped, the waffles are on the table? Yes, we sure can. That's a real thing. It's not like a joke. And so when I have shared the gospel with someone, and they come to know Jesus because I shared the gospel with them, can I say, because I shared the gospel with them, they have come to know Jesus? No, yes, I can. No, yes, I can. Because I know that without me, would God have gotten the job done? Yes, and would God have used somebody else? Yes, but did I show up? And did I preach? And did the person come when I did? So therefore, did I mix? Did I participate? And is it right for God to say, because Renaud shared the gospel, this person came to know Jesus. So who did the work of that person coming to know Jesus? Well, God did, we know that. And who else? Renaud. And the only difference between me showing up and doing that and not showing up and not doing that isn't that person's future destiny. It's whether or not I sit at the table and I get to say, in part, that person came to Jesus because I shared the gospel with them. So think about this. If I share the gospel badly, and I fumble it and I mess it up, and it doesn't go well, is that person's rejection of the gospel on my shoulders? No, because God can get this done without me. And is the waffles going to end up on the table? In other words, is God going to redeem all of the folks that he is going to redeem and redeem the world? Yes. So I have nothing to lose. Are you with me? I am not God. I cannot transform a heart. So in sharing the gospel, my inability of doing something not well isn't going to change this person's future destiny. If I don't show up, my not showing up isn't going to change that person's future destiny. So I've got nothing to lose, but if I do show up and I preach the gospel and the person comes to know Jesus, do I have a tremendous amount to gain? Because I'm suddenly included in a miraculous redemptive event in a human heart that because I did, they did. How awesome is that? That when I'm preaching the gospel, in any way that it goes other than the person coming to know Jesus, I'm good, I'm free. God's responsible. But if they come to Jesus, I'm included immediately. How awesome is that? Not included if it doesn't go well in the immediacy, because God's got it. Included if it does. I mean, that's the best case scenario on planet Earth. And that is our freedom. That is our freedom. That is actually where we live. And how do we know this? Because I've got a waffle story? Renaud, that's a bit of a stretch. It's not in the Bible. It's a waffle story. Oh, no. Oh, it's in the Bible for sure. It's in the Bible in a profound way, and that's what we want to travel through today. So where is it in the Bible that helps us understand that our job is not the transformation, the saving, the competency of incredible sharing so that the person, the convincing, the convicting, all of that, our job is to show up and share the gospel. And that the power of the gospel and the Spirit of God's job is to do everything else. But when he does that thing, if we were the ones that shared, we're immediately included in, he did it, she did it. How awesome is that? Here it is. So let's take a look. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through 20. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Who suppresses the truth? All mankind. For what can be known about God is plain to them, all of us and all mankind, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, has been clearly perceived. Notice these words, right? It's not just that God made it known. Has the human race perceived it? So they've clearly perceived it. Oh, there it is. Clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they, who's they? The human race, are without excuse. When somebody rejects Jesus, it is not because you didn't do a good job sharing with them. It's because mankind has suppressed the truth and they are without excuse. No one will get to say to God, I would have come to Jesus if Renaud had just accurately and convincingly shared the gospel with me. But he fumbled over it and he didn't make it convincing and there wasn't emotional music behind it and it didn't stir my heart and it wasn't relevant to my single moment. So I rejected you. If only he had done it properly, I would have believed. No one's going to get to say that because what? They are without excuse. And this sentence isn't about Renaud shared the gospel incredibly well. It was emotionally beautiful, perfectly timed, and it was relevant for that human, and they rejected, therefore they have no excuse. Do you notice? I'm not in this sentence. You notice that? Nor are you. Who's in this sentence? God and us. And we're the rejecting ones, and God is the one showing us. So, next one, Romans chapter 2, verse 14 through 15. For when Gentiles, this is so cool, who do not have the law, by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves. Now watch what it says. Even though they do not have the law, they show, so this idea that we do the right thing even though we don't know God's word at all, shows us something. Look what it shows us. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. In other words, what this is saying is that the human beings that don't even know the law, the word of God, the gospel, when they behave in a sense that says, maybe I shouldn't do these things, or they feel conviction, it proves that God has already internally into each human written the realities of consciousness and the realities of eternity in the heart, so that again, what causes us to come to know him or reject is not the person sharing the gospel. You with me so far? Because we already bear witness that we have inside of us things who has done? God has done. Take a look at the next one. John 16:8. And when he comes, he will convict the world concerning sin and righteousness and judgment. Who is the he? Yeah, it's God, the Holy Spirit. So this is speaking specifically of the third person of the Trinity, the Spirit of God, who will come to do what? Convict the world concerning sin, our fallenness, righteousness, you need Jesus, and judgment. If you don't know Jesus, it's not going to go well. You with me? So, does it say here, when he comes, the Spirit of God, he, along with Renaud's incredible ability to share the gospel, will be convicting to the world concerning sin, righteousness, and judgment? No, who's doing the convicting? He and he alone. When I share the gospel with someone, I am doing zero convicting. I am passing on to someone a thing that feels like a message, but the Bible says is a power. It is a power. And this thing, the gospel, the power unto salvation, when it's passed along by the Spirit of God, taking his gospel in the way that he chooses in power, will convict the world concerning sin, righteousness, and judgment. Not me. Okay, next one. Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he, who's the he? God again, has put eternity into man's heart. All mankind has in their heart, written into their heart, eternity, right? So when I come to a human being and I'm sharing with them the gospel, it is not my ability, my perceiving of timing, my competency, my convincing nature that is going to be the key to them coming to know Jesus. It is the gospel itself that is the key to go into them, used by the Spirit of God to unlock, as the Spirit of God sees fit, the reality that eternity is already in man's heart. And so that's why Paul writes and says the gospel itself is the key. Renault's not the key. Renault's presentation is not the key. Renault's ability is not the key. The gospel is the key. So what a freedom is that? That I have to take this thing that is the key, and I just have to, with the simplistic accuracy of a 5-year-old, just let the thing that is the key settle into the mind of a human, and then let the Spirit of God do the convicting as he sees fit, and this key unlock what God has already put in mankind's heart, and leave that process to who? To God. To God. If I take that process on as part of what I'm assuming should be the outcome of my sharing the gospel, I turn myself into a little God, and I will be crushed under that weight. Because every time someone rejects, then I will think to myself, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? I didn't pick the timing. First time I shared the gospel, literally, I was in high school, and I build the conference. I think maybe I saw the video with the blood on the hands. I don't really remember, but I'm like, I'm sharing the gospel. So I go, and I've got this friend in my classroom, and he was in South Africa. He was from India originally in terms of his family, and I go up to him, and I share the gospel with him. And you know, it was as weird an experience as you all experience when you share the gospel with someone. And about a week later, he comes to me, and this is no joke, and he says, I thought about what you said, and I have decided to follow Satan. So he said to me. He was actually like looking into Satanism, because he's like, now he was a middle schooler, high schooler age, and that's what middle school and high schoolers do. It's not just good enough to say no thank you. They're going to be like, you shared that awkward thing with me, I'm following the devil. But I remember thinking to myself, I should never share the gospel again. Apparently when I share the gospel, people don't just not receive Jesus, they're actually immediately propelled to follow Satan himself. Really, for years I was like so nervous to ever share the gospel again, because I had placed on my shoulders a godlike quality that said, because I shared it in a way that was not effective, I have actually set the course of someone's life in a detrimental way, and it was never mine to set the course for them. Take a look at this over here, Acts chapter 17. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. Who has determined throughout history the allotted periods and dwelling places of all of mankind? Not incredible? We forget verses like this. We think, oh my gosh, the world is so random, everything's just happening. No, it's not. No, it's not. He has literally determined allotted periods and boundaries for their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. Look what this says. What purpose did he set allotted times and dwelling places for mankind? That they would have the opportunity to seek him and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. But then he says this, but it turns out even giving allotted times and space for humankind to perhaps come find me, will they come find me? No. So don't worry, I'm actually near to them because they have in them their being in me. So who is it that has set allotted times and places for the people we're going to share the gospel with to hear the gospel and then to respond to it in the time allotted and the period allotted that he is? Who set that? God. So as much as we're going to be strategic and say, plan it well, use your timing well, don't walk into a place and share the gospel when it's not the right time. We're going to do all sorts of timing things and tools and perceptions. But at the end of the day, our care has to be that as perhaps effective as we want to be and strategic as we want to be with our part in the story, we should not forget that when we do those things, it's because as a 5-year-old in God's kitchen, we want to bring our best to him, do our best with what he's given us. But it is not up to us to determine if I do it this way and this time and then it'll happen, and if I don't, it won't. That is actually God's to determine. So look here. Here's what we have then. Here's our conclusion. Creation, God's business, shows himself to people. They have no excuse. Conscience, Romans chapter 12. We know we have a conscience already set, even Gentiles. In other words, people that don't know God. Conviction comes from the Holy Spirit. Eternity is written on our hearts, and the time and date of somebody's encounter with Jesus is determined by him, not by us. So our part has nothing to do with any of those things. Our part is the privilege of joining God by taking the gospel itself and just sharing it with someone. And when we do, that is what happens. So here it is. Nobody who rejects God will have a legitimate excuse. We know that. This is one of those little things. Gee whiz, if Stacy hadn't messed up the gospel presentation, Fred would be in heaven. Now, we have a version of that in our heads, don't we? A version of fear that if we don't have it all put together, that's what's going to happen. But here's the reality. Gee whiz, if Stacy hadn't messed up, nope, the gospel, nope, presentation, nope, Fred would be in heaven. That's not a truth. Even if Stacy messed up the gospel presentation, is God going, darn it, I wanted Fred to come to heaven, but Stacy blew it. That would be like me in the kitchen having one of my kids walk in as a 5-year-old and they mix some salt in instead of sugar, and I say, that's it, waffles are gone. And when the other kids come down hungry, I say, y'all starving today. Here's why. Because Hope didn't put the sugar in like I told her. I had a plan, but she messed it up. So no waffles today. You'd literally be like, what kind of a dad are you? But that's not how God functions. He's like, if Stacy messes up, guess what? 1, Stacy will have other opportunities. 2, maybe even with Fred. 3, if not, God will take care of Fred. Because we know that at the end of the day, it's God who sets the thing. So, where does this take us? Tools. Tools. Now that we understand that we have a freedom to be able to engage in bringing the gospel to people without the fear that we can actually mess it up, but with the joy that knows that as we share it, if this person were to come to Jesus, we are actually a participant. And listen to this. This is so crazy. Watch this now. This is an important thing to remember. Let's say I share the gospel with somebody and they don't receive Jesus that day, right? Then 6 months go by and somebody else shares the gospel with them and they don't receive Jesus that day. Then 3 years go by and somebody shares the gospel with them and they don't receive Jesus that day. And then 4 years go by and now I don't even know who they are anymore because they were in my high school and I'm now married with 2 kids, and somebody shares the gospel and they come to know Jesus. Will I be at that table and God go, big hand for Renault, Sarah, Bob, and Kim who shared the gospel and they know Jesus because of them? Yes, I will. Isn't that crazy? I may be included in people's salvation that I didn't even know came to Jesus because at some point I shared the gospel with them and I was part of their story. So I'm not even saying that when you share the gospel, if they don't come to know Jesus, you lost nothing, you just won't get included in their salvation. The second you share the gospel with someone, if they ever in the lifetime come to know Jesus, you're in. And if they don't, have you obeyed the beauty of what God has called you to, participated with him in redemption anyway? Yes. You came in the kitchen. And it's going to be like, Renault did it. So it's just incredible. The only thing I have to lose, and it's not even losing that much, but it's to lose, is if I do nothing. But if I do anything and participate in what God I do. So tools. We start with this tool right here. This is something you're going to hear about a lot. You've already started hearing about. You're going to hear about it more. This is a tool that a friend of mine at a church in Texas, great pastor, great church, they kind of articulated this tool, and it just resonated beautifully with us because, honestly, when I looked at this tool, I sort of said to myself, this is kind of how I do it anyway. This is sort of the progression of sharing the gospel. So sharing the gospel starts with good conversations. Then it moves on to God conversations, and it goes to gospel conversations. Now, what this means, here's where we start. If you're going to use this tool, guess what? You and I need to be having lots of good conversations with people that don't know Jesus. And you say, well, of course we do. But here's the trick. Oftentimes, as we progress in our biblical community experience, we find ourselves one day that all of the people we actually have any good conversations with are just other believers. And that the people that don't know Jesus, we don't have good conversations with them because their life doesn't match ours. They have nothing in common with us. So even at work, we may work with people, but when they come in on Monday and they're having conversations about the TV series they watched, and you're like, that thing has sex in it, it's terrible. We just don't join the conversation. We have no good conversation because we feel like any conversation we have with them, we have nothing in common. So we stop having regular good conversations with people. And man, if we're doing that, there is no transition to God conversations. We become that weirdo that goes straight to gospel conversation, and people are like, who are you again? Because we've had no good conversations with people. I have the opportunity in regularity, as many of you know, being downtown Winter Garden and popping into Oxum. And at Oxum, the coffee shop there, the staff that we have there, they are a mixed group of staff in terms of their spiritual journey. And so some of them know Jesus, some of them don't know Jesus. They're just sort of come from all sorts of different places, and that is on purpose, and we love that. But when I'm around those folks, part of our journey is just to create for them a new paradigm that people that follow Jesus aren't typically always either weird, mean, or judgmental. They're actually quite nice to be around, right? And so what that means is that I've got to have lots and lots of just good conversations. I'll walk into the back of Oxen sometimes, and some of the staff there, they do these little lists where they come up with like a theme, and then they figure out on each barista which person they'll be. So, I remember when Pokemon was one of them. Which Pokemon character would you be? So I walk in the middle of this conversation. I don't know anything about Pokemon. All I remember is at some point I think it was banned in the Christian world because it's demonic. I don't know. All those things, pretty much everything was banned at some point. And so I walk in, and they're having a Pokemon conversation. So I walk up, and I'm like, what you guys doing? And they're like, we're trying to figure out who's Pokemon. What Pokemon are you? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you think? What Pokemon should I be? Do you know Pokemon at all? Don't know Pokemon really well. Remind me. Can you throw in some pictures on your phone? Show me the Pokemon characters. So there we are in the back, and we're going through Pokemon characters, and I'm looking at them like, oh, that one looks kind of fun. What does that one do? That one has firepower that shoots fire out of its eyes. Oh, I like that. Then we have a conversation about what it would be like if I shot fire out of my eyes and who I might destroy with that fire. And then they put my name next to that Pokemon character. We laugh about it, and then immediately I say, do you want to talk about Jesus? No. I end the conversation and I move on. What have I just had? A good conversation. And how many of those good conversations am I going to have? Lots and lots of them. Never transitioning necessarily to a God conversation. I just want to build up a plethora of good conversations. Now, when you look at this tool can be used in any one of two ways. Sometimes this is a tool that is used in one conversation. You're in a good conversation. There's an opportunity to move to a God conversation, and then that leads to the opportunity to move to a gospel conversation should you take that path. Yes, absolutely. This tool is designed to be in the context of one conversation. And this tool is designed to have lots of good conversations for a season, then maybe several good to God conversations for a season, then maybe several God to kind of gospel conversations for a season, and then finally some really great gospel conversations. That may be over a span of time. Either of those scenarios, it's a good move. But what we need to do is we need to say, am I having good conversations with people that don't know Jesus for the sake of having good conversations? Did you hear me that last part? I'm having a good conversation with a non-believer because I want to get to a gospel conversation. How about you just have a good conversation with them because they're a human? And how about they start experiencing you as a human? What fun would that be? And then it affords that. So let's have lots of good conversations. Then, when we've had good conversations, or we're having a good conversation, and there is a space in which there seems to be an opportunity to move it to a God conversation, we just want to be ready to always perceive when that might happen. That's a combination of having a competency, what we're doing here. You just have in your head now, good conversation, God conversation, gospel conversation. When you have that in your head, guess what's going to start happening? You're going to be paying attention to every good conversation you're having, and in the back of your head, not for an agenda's sake, because you love this person, you're just going to be paying attention to things that might be said that give you a transition to be able to add a God conversation into there. What is a God conversation? What do we mean when we say moving to a God conversation? That is where the person is sharing something, and you can bring spiritual journey or God into the mix in the conversation. It can be very lightly done. It can be more personally and heavy done. Heavy meaning more intimately done. Sometimes it's just a space of questioning. The conversation's happening. There was a scene in the movie or whatever, and you may say, speaking of that, what is your sort of spiritual journey like? I do this a lot, especially when I'm in a space where we're talking about things that people are really, really interested in, and it has a spiritual component. Oh, I love that TV series. It was so cool with like all the stuff, like you've heard me mention K-pop Demon Hunters. I mean, that's why I love stuff like this, because the second I've got something like that, I've got it. And my good conversation might start with like, did any of you guys see K-pop Demon Hunters? I'm literally with people that don't believe in demons or anything else. And they're like, yeah, it was so cool as warriors. And I'm like, and then in that conversation, I might say, speaking of that, what do you think about like demons for real? Do you think they're real? And what am I suddenly in? I'm in a God conversation. We're having a conversation about spiritual things and demons and whether they're real or not. Now, they may say, no, I don't think they're real. I'm not going to go, well, they are, just so you know, because we're having a God conversation now. And I'm trying to move this to a gospel conversation. No, I'm just like, that's so interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And you know what they're inevitably going to do? Well, what do you think? And then I'm going to say, well, actually, I think they're quite real. Well, that's kind of weird. I know, but that's just where I stand. End of God conversation. Maybe I'll wait till later, or maybe it moves on. That's one way. Here's another way. This is such an easy way to have a conversation be a God conversation. Can I pray for you? Do you know what I've found, especially in our cultural context today? I think we believe that when we say that, people are going to be like, no, that's weird. I don't need your prayers. That's never happened to me. So I was with a guy in North Carolina. I was speaking at a conference 3 weeks ago, and I'm still learning, because some of these things, I have that same mindset. That's awkward. Don't do that. Don't walk around and be like to the waitress, can I pray for you? Can you share something for me to pray for? I'm always like, oh my gosh, here we go. But I've changed my mind on this. So I'm with this guy, and we're literally in line at like one of those places where you check out, and the guy behind the POS is checking out, and literally we're standing there, and he looks at me and says, hey, we're going to grab lunch in a second, and we're going to pray for the meal. Is there anything we can pray for you while we're at it? So I'm standing there, and the first instinct is like, come on, like this guy doesn't want you, like, and what does the guy do? Well, actually, I've got this big test tomorrow that I'm going to be taking, and I've been really nervous about it. I'd appreciate that. I don't know if he's a Christian or not, a believer or not, a Buddhist or not, an atheist or not, but what he did say is, I've got a big test tomorrow, and that would be great. And so he said, we'd love to know, what's your name? And he gave the name, and we're like, great. And then as we walk in, he's like, thank you. And guess what we went and did? We sat and we prayed for him. And then afterwards, just before we left, he pops his head and he says, prayed for you. I'll be praying for you until that test tomorrow. And the guy's like, thank you. And I'm like, holy smokes, I'm terrible at this. I want to be like that. But listen, let me just tell you, it is amazing when you just say to somebody, do you mind if I pray for you? Or would you like anything, any prayer for anything? People just seem to respond like, sure, that'd be great. That's an easy one. Here's one that happened. I have no idea what time I'm supposed to go till soon. Oh, well. But I'm sure Josh will be like, it's time. What? Till Sunday. There you go. Okay. So I won't go till Sunday. But Hadley and Hadley is my oldest bio daughter, and she's on our worship team, and she's here. And we were at Oxum, actually, and we're talking with one of the incredible girls there. That's one of our baristas, and she doesn't know Jesus. She has some spirituality, and we're chatting with her this week. This literally just happened. And she just shares with Hadley and I just that she's having a tough week, and she's there's not circumstantial, just internally, and some things going on. So Hadley, my daughter, she just schools me all the time. She's just listening, and she's like asking great questions about it, and then she says this. She says, "Man, I know how you feel. I've really struggled with the same thing at different periods in my life, and it's hard to get out of that gray space sometimes." So I'm just watching her, and I'm like, boom, she's there. Is this a good conversation or a God conversation? Well, it's a good conversation right now. It's a great conversation, actually, because there's empathy and connection. And then Hadley's like, and then now, why was that girl sharing with me, the person that technically is over her employment, and my daughter? Why was she comfortable sharing this intimate thing with us? Do you know why? Because of 100 good conversations we've had with her over the last year. She trusts because we have great conversations all the time, and we insert little vulnerabilities when we can that aren't about God, just about what's vulnerable, and we create vulnerability, and then she feels it. Well, then we're driving home. Hadley gets home, and she says, so this girl is one of the people Hadley's praying for that's, part of our One More Space. And so she says, Dad, I really just feel like I want to send her some of the songs that carried me through some of those dark times, but they're all worship songs, and I'm not sure where she's at. So I said, well, just pray about that. So Hadley does, and then she comes to me and she says, I think I need to send it. So she sends her this little note. She's like, hey, these 2 songs I'm going to send to you are just songs that meant a great deal to me while I was walking through some of what you just described, and they were just super helpful. I know that they're specifically songs about God, and I'm not sure where you stand on that, but hopefully these songs, they're just beautiful, will be helpful to you. So she sends them. And the girl sends back and says, don't ever send me worship songs again, you psycho. No, she didn't do any of that. What did she send back? Thank you so much. I'll listen to them this afternoon. Then the next day when I bump into her, she's like, those songs were so beautiful. They were so helpful. Now, I don't know that she knows even what those songs are about. But it wasn't about worship songs. It was about Hadley. And guess what just happened? We moved a what? A good conversation to what? To a God conversation. And now that's going to continue. We're going to have several God conversations because those songs are in play now, but not like the next conversation. We're going to have a couple Pokemon conversations first before we go straight up to a God conversation again. But now we've made the transition, and now we're playing right here. We're no longer just playing here. We're playing here. And at some point, guess what's going to happen? We're going to start playing here. And then eventually we're going to be right here. And that's how it goes. So again, sometimes that happens in one conversation. Sometimes that happens over a span. But if we want to be a people that carry the gospel to other people, we need to be a people that are actually human beings to them and not agenda-driven Christians to try to convince them of a thing. And we do that when we feel like it's our responsibility. We don't do that when God said, take your time. Just go tell them about me, and I'll take care of the rest. So there is the tool, using your testimony. And what I mean by testimony isn't the typical Christian way we use that. Have your testimony ready. Before I knew Jesus, after I knew Jesus, Jesus is good. I'm talking about, I struggled with that too. That's a testimony. Anything that's your story that you can connect to their story, that you can then say, and here's what happened to me that helped me out of that. And you use God to do that because God actually did. You don't use God because it's a strategy. You just use God because he actually did, like Hadley did. Then you are using testimony to connect and to move people into a God conversation. So does that make sense? This is how the tool moves on. Okay, next. Who does this best? Well, the same person that always does this best, Jesus. Jesus is the master and model for everything we do. If you're ever doing something that Jesus either didn't do, doesn't do, or then just stop and do something that he did. So did Jesus engage with people, starting with a good conversation, moving it to a God conversation, and then moving it to a gospel conversation? All the time. All the time. And listen to me. This is crazy. God of the universe. You can find spaces in Scripture where Jesus has nothing but a good conversation. He goes, he talks to someone, he does a thing for them, he moves on, and you're like, you didn't tell him who you were. He's like, I just had the first conversation with him. God does this. Where does this happen? A number of places, but here's one that's just beautiful. The Samaritan woman. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, can you give me a drink? Can you give me a drink? For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Doesn't seem like much, does it? Just, hey, while you're drawing water, would you mind if I had a little bit of it? So this is what's interesting. One, this is a good conversation because it's just a conversation. One human to another, I'm thirsty, could you help me? What a wonderful thing. A vulnerability presented, I need some water, you've got a bucket, could you help me? When we're vulnerable with ourselves and all that, it's always good conversation, connective conversation. But here's what makes this conversation particularly good, because a good conversation in our cultural context, when we have it with people that don't know Jesus and there's no agenda to quickly move to other conversations, they actually find us to be human. And listen, I'm telling you this, a lot of people that don't know Jesus, when they think about the typical consummate Christian, it's not a nice picture. So now they're encountering you and they find out you're a Christian. And if you're just normal with them, their thought is going to be, why are you talking to me? Why are you so nice? It's weird. It's weird. Now take a look. This is what happens here. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, asked for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Her curiosity was like, I get that you're just asking for a drink, but you shouldn't be. You're a Jewish person, a godly person, a person that God is in good grace with. I'm a Samaritan, a yucky person. And now she wasn't actually saying, I'm terrible, you're awesome. She was saying, I know how this goes. Y'all judgmental Jews, you don't talk to us Samaritans. Why would you be talking to us? It's kind of that Christian, non-Christian thing, right? But Jesus just talked to her. And what kind of conversation? This is my well. Why are you here, Samaritan woman? No. He was like, can I get some water? It's a good conversation. Why are you talking to me? Well, why wouldn't I, right? So look what he does next. This is so cool. Now, listen, Jesus happens to have the luxury to know exactly what's in the human heart and exactly what's in the human mind, literally why it's happening, because he can actually know our thoughts. And we know that because he often said somebody's thoughts out loud for them. So we don't have that luxury. So when Jesus moves through something super quick, don't feel like that's the principle. Do it this quick. Just look at what Jesus does here. Look what he does. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, that's me, and he would have given you living water. Look what Jesus did. He's not saying, okay, let's talk the gospel. He's just like, I am talking to you, but if you knew who's conversing with you, you would know that actually the water that I can give you would be so much greater than the water you could give me. Yet I did ask you for water. How cool is that? Isn't that cool? Jesus presents himself thirsty, vulnerable, but then when the person comes, Jesus says, you're vulnerable too. And I have something for you that's even better than the thing you have for me. Isn't that beautiful? What a beautiful God conversation. And look what happens. The woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get the living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. Look what happened because he brought a God conversation to the table. This person now becomes curious, and what conversation is she having with him? A God conversation. She's moved as well. Hold on, what are you saying? Are you saying you're greater than Jacob, who literally gave us living water because we only live as a village down there because of this well? And what's Jesus going to do? He's going to be like, actually, good point. Just saying, right? And we're going to move to a gospel conversation, but not today because that's for another time. So here it is. This is Jesus. Next slide. I think, it's just a circle. Okay. See, I don't really do slides, but I'm honoring Josh right now by following the slides. Past circle, I think, yeah, there you go, try it. That's what I thought. I just want to make sure I was done. Okay, so all this to say, does all that make sense? Whose responsibility is it that people come to know Jesus? God's. Who's going to do that work? God. Who convicts them? God. Who's turning their heart? God. What is my part in the story? Take the power that is the key to all this, the gospel, and share it. How? By having good conversations that move to God conversations, that move to gospel conversations in a natural and normal space so that I'm as much human as I am follower of Jesus to the other humans. And then we're going to see God do what God does and us do what we do. And when people come to know Jesus, guess who's included in their salvation? anyone who shared the gospel with them. I hope that's me. I hope that's you. Thank you, guys.